Hello and welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. 2 assassination attempts, a last-minute candidate switch, war in the Middle East, border issues, dire predictions of dictatorship, and death threats against election workers. And all of it sitting atop an economy that almost no one feels is going well, despite record stock market gains, low unemployment, and rising wages. Americans are feeling anxious. What's happening? Here to share what he's heard from voters and poll workers across the country is USA Today national correspondent Trevor Hughes. Thanks for joining me, Trevor.
You bet.
Let's start with the tension related to this election, which has been on a knife's edge for months. We're 2 days away from Election Day now. What are voters sharing with you regarding what the 2 candidates are saying?
You know, this is one of those elections where the vast majority of people know how they're going to vote. And in fact, millions of Americans have already voted. The die is cast for many folks. People are nervous as heck. The stakes feel like they couldn't be higher for people on both sides of the aisle. And there is just this tension about the future of our country. And this election really seems to be the sort of tipping point for many Americans.
You wrote that there is a heightened fear of election-related violence, which is creating a lot of anxiety out there. What have you and your USA Today colleagues been seeing out at polling stations? And has there been any violence reported so far?
You know, we haven't seen a ton of direct violence in this election yet, unless you count things like people setting ballots on fire, which we have now seen in the Pacific Northwest. There is a lot of fear among election workers. I mean, people are putting bulletproof film over their office windows. There's panic buttons, security cameras. In one county I've covered, they built a glass-fronted penalty box so that people who can want to watch the election can watch how the votes are being counted, but it makes it hard for them to yell and harass and throw things at the election workers, because that's the level of tension. People have been thrown out of public meetings. People have been arrested. There have been lawsuits all over the place. You know, folks really see the counting of the votes, how this election is taking place, as a key part of the decision itself. It always has been a key part, but I think for many decades, we took for granted that elections worked in a certain way, and we didn't really question them that hard. And those questions that are now being asked in an election that is the first presidential election since the January 6th insurrection, people are just very, very nervous and concerned. I mean, my local county clerk, I live in Colorado, which is not a swing state. It votes Democrat. The county clerk in my county has started wearing a bulletproof vest to work.
What about the possibility of post-election violence? What did you hear from people on that?
Well, again, you know, talking about the January 6th insurrection, I mean, that was post-election violence. I covered that election. I covered that insurrection. I was in tear gas at the Capitol. And there are many, many Americans who fear that there will be the same kind of right-wing violence directed at election officials, maybe directed at Congress. Now, there's obviously a huge change in the way security is handled for the certification of the votes. But there is a widespread fear that if people on both sides of the aisle don't get what they want, that there may be sort of a physical backlash as a result of that.
You wrote about the fears for some marginalized communities like the LGBTQ community. Tell me about that.
You know, for folks like that, they see a second Trump administration as something that would make it hard for them to physically exist in America as their true selves. There's this a lot of idea that we will go backward in the sense of taking away rights from people who have them. Transgender issues in particular have been a big role in this election. And there are a lot of communities, immigrant communities as well, who are very, very worried that a second Trump administration will be punitive, it will be harsh, and that it will be really focused on sort of people who look like me or benefit people who look like me, sort of mainstream white guys.
Let's dig into some of the issues driving what so far looks like record voter turnout, starting with the economy. Are voters feeling especially anxious about their economic future?
Oh, absolutely. People, I have to go to the grocery store this week, and I'm a little nervous about going because it is so expensive. Car insurance, gas, rent, mortgage payments. People are paying a lot more than they were a few years ago. And even though wages have gone up and the stock market's doing really well, the cost of living in America today is up. And we interviewed folks around the country who over and over said, I don't like Donald Trump. I think he's better on the economy. They said they are willing to overlook all of the other issues that they set out as his challenges as a candidate and said, but we believe he's better on the economy. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters to me. We interviewed one woman who said, I'm worried about potentially losing abortion access for my high school daughter, but I'm more worried about her not having a job at graduation.
You also know there are two active global wars happening right now, both of which are growing in scope. Israel has now targeted and bombed huge areas of southern Lebanon, causing roughly 1 million people to flee. There are 10,000 North Korean soldiers in Russia. Was there fear that one or both of these conflicts could lead to further U.S. involvement?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we did hear from supporters of the former President Trump, was that his administration, because it has this attitude of peace through strength, that sort of wannabe dictators or bad actors would not act up because they knew that the President Trump, if he was back in office, would not stand for that he would step in, put his foot down, and prevent people from doing those things through any number of actions. And, I think there is a feeling among the former president's supporters that our economy isn't doing as well because we're sending billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine. We're helping Israel. And so there's a concern about maybe we should actually put America first.
Some of the fears you heard American voters expressing fell along party lines. How so?
We heard this from former President Trump supporters over and over that it's the economy, stupid, that here's a businessman, here's a successful businessman, and they believe that his approach to governing in terms of climate change, in terms of oil and gas extraction, that those are things that will strengthen the American economy, make American companies stronger by bringing more manufacturing back to this country. On the left, the vice president's supporters, a lot of folks who said, yeah, I'm willing to pay more in taxes or gasoline if it means that I have a cleaner environment. I'm happy to see gasoline go away if it means we are breathing cleaner air. You really saw a strong break, especially on climate change. But yeah, it is one of those things where we're not talking about, the marginal tax rate for funding education. These are huge, big picture issues about the future of our country that people have really fallen in stark lines on.
And then what did you hear in terms of a loss of rights? What are the fears there?
On the left in particular, you hear from marginalized communities that they're worried about losing rights, that they will be erased from the face of America. But I think it's important to remember, there are many people on the right who would say, what about the country that I grew up in? They feel like America has lost touch with what it used to be, the values that it used to stand for, the values that we exercised every day in our communities and our families and our neighborhoods. And so for those folks, they feel there's this real palpable sense of loss for a country that they thought they lived in, and they feel like it has lost something there.
Earlier in the week, we heard from your colleague, Lissa Goldberg, on how crises hotlines are preparing for a surge in election night calls. You also spoke with a mental health specialist. What did he share with you?
I talked to this doctor who is seeing the physical manifestations of this election anxiety. People are coming in, they can't sleep, they're worked up, they're nervous all the time. And he said it's really important to remember that even though this is a very important election, that for most people under most situations, things aren't going to change that dramatically on a day-to-day basis, no matter who wins the election. But he also sort of made the point that the media and politicians sort of build up in our minds that this is the worst time, that this is a scary time, that there are terrible things happening everywhere. And don't get me wrong, the stakes in this election are very, very high. But what he was making the point was that a lot of it is overblown because of manipulation by political candidates and by the media, particularly talking head television. And his piece of advice was, if you're sitting there stewing, maybe just go take a walk, because stewing in your own juices does not do any good to you. And taking a walk does a world of good.
We're almost at the finish line, just 2 days to go. Trevor, thank you so much for coming on The Excerpt.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.